Good evening, everybody. Welcome out to tonight's episode of Tax Sale Titans. This is me, episode number 22. I'm Shade Foray. I'm here with Steven Swenson. And yeah, we've been doing these podcast episodes here for a little bit, and I enjoy doing them because we get a chance to cover a lot of different things in a short period of time, and each one of them I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, with our members training that we do right before this, usually we're doing an entire topic. And so this podcast gives us a chance to go look at upcoming auctions. In fact, we're going to do that a little bit later when we go look at some Florida tax deed auctions. But what we're going to start out with tonight is we're going to go ahead and look at some California tax deed properties that sold recently. Then we're going to talk about tax lien risk and what is involved with that. Then, as I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and look into some Florida tax deed auctions and kind of review how Florida works and look at some upcoming sales.
Yeah, after that, we're going to review some properties that have EPA issues, to kind of show you what those look like and how we can gain additional information about some of them to see what the risk really is there and how we can look into it deeper if we come across it. But from there, we'll also be taking questions here to wrap things up before the end.
Yeah, definitely. And if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat section, and then we'll go ahead and answer any of them there at the end when we can. Before we get started, though, we want to, give a heartfelt thanks to all of our members, whether that be on our coaching level, our program, for those that are our YouTube members or watching us on some type of social media platform. We appreciate that you guys are coming to us to find out about tax sale training. It's something me and Shade have really kind of been doing our whole adult lives. We started with this back in 1999 and started teaching students as our own company back in 2007. And so we've been doing this a long time, and we appreciate you guys coming to us to learn more about how to do this.
Yeah, we've always had the most amazing students, people that are just awesome and that just need a little bit of help with tax sale investing and just trying to avoid some of the risks or some of the major problems. And so, yeah, happy to have all of you. Also, for any of you that may live in the Los Angeles area or Southern California area, we have a 3-day boot camp that we are doing this weekend in the area from the 10th to the 12th. They'll be coming up here, and our members can get in with a discount price of just $299 on it, which again, that includes the 3 full days here of training, which we'd love to have you out, for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be putting out some additional dates here in the future. So if you are interested in attending one of our 3 days, let us know and we can go ahead and get you some dates of when we'll be in that area or some of our next events.
And like Steve was saying, we're going to be taking a look at some different auctions here that have occurred here in California. And again, it's always interesting to look at the sales that have just taken place. We can see what people have paid. We can get an idea for some of the deals that were there. In fact, we love finding good deals, in results there that we can kind of use as examples. Or sometimes we find results that show us bad deals as well. We find it in the same way. But yeah, we're going to be reviewing some properties here in California. So to talk about just how California works here before we do that, California is a tax deed state, meaning that the county basically waits out a redemption period that's set in state law. Everything to do with how the county handles things is set in state law, but in California, they set a 5-year redemption period on properties. After 5 years of delinquency, though, the county can foreclose on them and then offer them up at auction, to pay off the delinquent taxes. And so that's what we see every year. Every year the counties there in California hold annual auctions where they sell off the properties that have just been foreclosed on. So they sell those off to the highest bidder, and beyond that, though, it's pretty straightforward tax deed state.
Yeah. Now, when we're talking about who handles the tax sale, it's going to be the tax collector or the treasurer within the county government. So that's what we're going to be looking for. Sometimes they refer to these property as tax defaulted property. So sometimes using that keyword might be able to help you find an upcoming auction or information. Now, they're going to use a premium bid method like any type of auction. Like Shade said, they're pretty basic. That's going to start at the delinquent taxes, penalties, and fees, and then bid up into price. Now, the deed will go ahead and be issued within about 30 to 60 days. of the auction taking place. But one thing that is kind of unique is that California does not offer over-the-counter tax deeds. What they do is they'll go ahead and offer resales. In fact, there's been a recent law a few years ago that allowed them to start offering these properties for a lower opening bid amount. The reason is they had a bunch of these properties that essentially kind of got over water, where the taxes were so much owed that nobody was buying them, and so they just sit there on the books. And so to remedy that, what a lot of these counties will do is go ahead and have a resale where we've seen them start as little as $100.
Yeah, at some point they need to find a way that they can find a new owner that can get into the property, and that means letting go of the tax debt that is basically has it's making the property toxic at the time, because obviously the more money that's owed, the less desirable the property looks to investors. And so being able to offer a resale and lower the price is a really good way to fix that. The other thing about California is they have a lot of online auctions. I mean, a lot of their auctions are online, even compared to most states. I would say they have a high percentage of auctions that are online, using either Bid for Assets, which does a lot of them, GovEase, or Real Auction. They have a little bit of everything there within the California county. So a lot of online opportunities. There may still be some on-site opportunities too. It wouldn't surprise me, but there are a lot of online opportunities in California.
Yeah, there's a number of counties that still do on-site auctions, but many of them have moved on to using Real Auction. Bid for Assets is another big one, and GovEase too has started adding a lot of auctions. Now, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and look at some sales. Now, I have quite a few to go through, so we'll get through them. We have some extras if we have time or not, but I wanted to get a feel of what's kind of happened over the last few months. Now, some of these areas are going to maybe bid a little bit higher, but in looking at the profit margins, I think that they're pretty interesting. So this first property here we see sold in Sonoma County, starting at an opening bid. I mean, it was sold for $161,000, started an opening bid of $34,000.
Yeah, it looks like so valued wise, they show 100,000 in improvements here with the land value of 70,000, and we've got a full address on it. And so I think we're looking at some kind of a single family home. Is this it right here?
Yeah, this is it right here. And one thing that's kind of interesting, so it's kind of right there, and I'll show you. Here it's currently for sale. So they bought this property for 161,000. Here, 3 months ago, and now it's currently for sale. So since that time, they've received the deed to the property, and they put it up for sale. And I think all they've done is just clean the property up. Maybe they spent $5 or $10 grand, if that. Just clearing everything out, because as you look into it, it still is, needs to have everything done.
Yeah, well, and they are trying to, well, they're trying to double their money is what they're trying to do. Well, they're probably not going to quite double it, but with what they bought it for and what they're trying to sell it for, they're basically trying to sell it for about double that. And yeah, like you said, they maybe swept out the property and done some stuff, but the total value on it, they must be convinced that there's enough value in the property there that somebody else will come in here and go through the steps to to rehab the property and get it ready for use at that price point. And it does, I mean, there are things about the property that are pretty charming. I mean, it looks like it's it's somewhere in some hills here. I can't tell if it's in the middle of the city or not, but it looks like it's surrounded here by forest area, and it also looks like it's been somewhat gutted, like it's ready for I mean, it's usable probably as it is, but it needs a remodel job here, which yeah, it looks like they're kind of leaving that open. But some of the things like the windows might be updated. I can't tell. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting house.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're easily going to make 100 grand on this deal. If they go ahead and sell it for, I don't think they're into it more than 5 or 10 grand. That would be my assumption. And they're trying to make a good 100 to 120, 130 grand on it. And that's still going to be a great return on a house that's probably valued at, in this, they're trying to actually sell it pretty cheap, because as we look at some of the other properties within the area, you can see that they're selling, this is right next door, 672.
Oh
This
yeah,
is
the money's there. It's you can tell the money's there. It doubled the price.
Yeah, this is actually a really tiny. It's only 700 square feet. Sold for 442,000. So this one's quite a bit bigger than that. Almost double the size. It has an extra bathroom. You could easily have more than one. You could probably add 3 beds in there if you wanted.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it's a bargain at 299, and somebody could fix it up. They could even put a couple 100,000 into it, and it would still, be worth it. There would still be, they'd still have equity in the property even if they put 200,000 into it.
yeah, so at 161, I think that was a pretty good deal. This house was a little interesting. I don't know how I feel about that opening, that high bid amount.
Yeah, they
Uh,
paid quite 666. It opened up for how much here? For 42. So yeah, it bid up quite a bit. Yeah, let's see it.
Yeah, well, and it could be argued that they overpaid for it, but you kind of get an idea of why they did. Here's what they value in the property at.
Oh
You
wow.
know,
So that actually makes sense. So they did pay 2/3 of value for it. But I mean, it's worth nearly $1 million, and so it's so new. It was built in 2011, and so they're making $300,000 on it. With buying it this way. Yeah, I mean, I would say that's. I mean, and it's a property. I mean, they could be buying this for their own personal use. They could be buying this as an investment property. Whatever it is, making $300,000 on the purchase alone on it is pretty awesome.
yeah, it's right here at the end of the street. They've got kind of this yard out here, this grass up here in front. So them paying 666,000 really probably it makes sense based on how new this property is and based on what the value is. So they could easily make 300 grand on this property, without too much effort. I mean, even if they put in 100 grand, they could still make 250 or more. And so even though they paid up for it, even though it was a high, I mean, this is in Sonoma County too. We're looking at, in an area that has some pretty high property values. So it makes sense to me why they were willing to pay up for it and why, bidders were willing to pay as high as they did.
Yeah, I think it's a great deal. And I mean, if you were going to just buy a property out there, you were willing to pay $600,000 for it. They got a lot of bang for the buck on it. They're making a lot of money on that purchase for a property like that, and it's probably not going to need $100,000 worth of work because it was built in 2011. It looks like it's currently occupied here. Yeah, it's not going to need a major investment like that. If it did, there's room for it, but it does look like it'll be a pretty good profitable deal there, a good purchase.
Yeah. Here's another property, and this one they paid I think a little too high for it. But in looking into some of the comps, it made a little bit more sense to me, but it was there within the same sale, so I decided to go ahead and show it. It ended up selling for 186,000, and it's this trailer right here. And when I first looked at the what Redfin had on it, I said, okay, they paid way too much. It ended up selling for 186,000. Redfin is valuing it at only 239,000. But then when I started looking into the comps that were right around it, it made a little bit more sense to me, even though I do think they paid a little too high for it. This one here was built around the same time, 1972. It's your kind of your double wide, same size, sold for 415. This
Oh
one here,
yeah, yeah. It looks like they're everything else. I mean, at least everything else is selling for quite a bit more than that.
yeah, 415 for that one. And then this one here ended up selling for 407, this one being a little bit cheaper, but these are all pretty much the same thing. This is an over 55 community. And so picking it up for 186,000, they're still getting it for probably under 50 cents on the dollar.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. Yeah, just upon first look at it, you think, oh, yeah, it looked like they paid pretty close to market on it, but the Redfin number on it there, 240, is way under.
Yeah, exactly. Looking at the sales, they're kind of between 400 to 450. So, in that case, they're probably getting it closer to 40 cents, 45 cents on the dollar. and that may be the cheapest way you could buy, that type of property in that type of community.
Now this is an interesting one. It got one bid, opening bid was 140 and it sold for 140. Oh, and the value on it, goodness, somebody got, at least, I don't know what it is, but in terms of the numbers and improvements on it, 500,000. It seems crazy. I mean, yeah, it shows improvements of 500,000 and land value of 300,000.
Yeah, now when you look at the address, it just shows it right here, but it's actually up kind of, you can see that none of these homes have any numbers on them. But, and kind of looking into it, here's just what, they valued it on Redfin. But then when I was looking on Zillow, that's the price that they actually paid for it.
Yeah.
Was 140,000. So that's not what the actual value is. We'll look at the value here in a little bit. But one thing that was interesting is that it had all of these photos on the property that allowed us to kind of see what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times these places are the best sources for information on the property, just because if it's ever been listed historically, you're going to have all of this data on it. And yeah, this is all great information. Wow, they actually got this for a steal.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they did. Now, there's one thing that I was going to look up and see if I could find more information about it, which was a little bit of a red flag. And you can see they added
Yeah,
information here, but it says property is in receivership. Now, I wasn't able to find an answer that I feel confident enough to say on why that would even matter in a tax sale, especially within California. It may be some within California line. Maybe they're just saying that. I don't know, but that's kind of the risk that I saw there was, I don't know what that means. So that's probably something we need to talk with an attorney about to make sure. But other than that, we're really looking at a pretty good property, with some higher level type interior, that looks like, marble. And
yeah, it does have some nice features here to it. It's an odd house, definitely different from like most houses that you're going to see. But it does have a lot of custom work that's been done here to it. It looks like it's in a pretty cool area. It's interesting because the tax bill is high enough that it's got to be unpaid taxes for a long time period, maybe more than 5 years, in order to be up to 140,000 or whatever the opening bid amount was.
yeah, it ended up selling for 140,000. There was only one bidder on it, and maybe they were all scared away about this, but maybe this just puts us a longer holding time on it. Maybe it doesn't matter. I'm not sure, enough yet. I was kind of going to research it a little bit more. But even at the value, we're looking at a value of 557,000, land value of 325,000.
Yeah, it's like $1 million value practically.
Yeah, and looking at some of the properties that have sold within the area, this is one that sold really close to it on the same street, for 900,000.
There's
Here's
another
one
one.
on the same street, for over $1 million.
Holy cow!
And
I
this
can't
is
believe
the
you got that for
cheapest one.
140. That's crazy how much money they're gonna make on this.
Yeah. And then this is the one of the cheaper ones I could find, that sold for 606.
My goodness, that is insane. Yeah, like the cheapest level you could assign to that house is going to be $700,000 or $800,000 probably.
Yeah. Well, and it's got kind of a cool location. They've got some cool photos here. You've also got this house here in the back. I'm not sure what it is, but that could be used for something.
Yeah,
And
it's
and
big.
and even though the house is kind of uh, kind of different in this type of area, it probably would work. It's
Yeah.
got kind of a beautiful design inside,
It's been yeah, it's been really well done. It looks like.
and this is high level stuff here.
Yeah,
You've got look. I mean, look at that. Look at the size of that stovetop.
yeah,
You know,
that's really nice. It's really nice. They've got a lot of nice appliances in there. The work looks like it's nice too. A lot of features that cost more, things like the highlights we're looking at there. All of the work just to do a round house is a lot of work for everybody involved.
yeah. Yeah, so this one could be, I mean, there is a level of risk there that we don't know about, without more research. But this could really have been, a great deal. Picked up for 20 cents on the dollar,
Yeah, or less.
yeah. So really kind of a pretty interesting property.
Wow. Yeah, that one blows me away. That's one of the better deals that I've seen in a while. And does it include land? Or how?
Yeah, I just clicked off. I think it
Oh,
was 3 acres or something like that.
yeah, that is pretty good. This one looks kind of interesting. 42
Yeah.
acres.
Yeah, now this was a land property sold for 77,000, started at 19,000. You can see that it's 42 acres here. They're giving it just a value of land about 170,000. Now here's where the property is located. It's kind of 40 acres right here within this area. And well, what is the property valued at? In looking into it, these properties right here, so this property here, this property right here, property down here below, all of these properties have sold pretty recently. This one sold for 450,000.
How many acres is it?
These are all 40 acres as well.
Oh, really? So they're all the exact same size, or pretty
Well,
close?
this one's 38. The one that sold at tax sale was 42.
Yeah, that's close enough.
Yeah, this one here sold for 500,000 and it's 42 acres.
Oh, wow. This is another great buy. Holy cow.
Yeah, and this is the property just to the south of it. And this was the cheapest property that sold for 320, and it's kind of up here in this area, which isn't as
Eh,
flat and good an area as this area.
Yeah, far less accessible.
This one you've got roads up to the property, and they're obviously we're doing some type of uh, you know uh, doing some type of farming there, I should say. And you
Yeah,
can
it does look like farming they've got to be doing there on, but the ground has all been cleared.
yeah, and you can see kind of what people are doing here. So you're looking at a piece of land that sold for 70,000. It's probably valued between 400,000 to $500,000. These ones is kind of that there and
Oh
that
my
right
goodness.
there. So
How many bids did it get? Can we see that? All right, so there were some bids that started out. So I guess it bid up from 20,000 up to 77, but that's still so cheap for a property that is valued, so highly.
yeah, I mean, when we talk about picking up good pieces of land, this is a good piece of land to pick up. If you're worried about things like rehabbing a property or anything like this is just straight land, and it's not land that's just sitting. People value this land. Here's 3 properties here that sold right here that are bordering this property. These 3 properties bordered this property that sold for 450, 500, and then the cheap one out of the way sold for 320.
Yeah, that's as good as you're going to find with tax sale numbers and opportunities. I mean, we've seen a number of deals here where people are making more than just like double their money, sometimes triple their money, sometimes quadruple their money, or even more, I think, in some of these cases.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember kind of what this property was. You can see that it only got 1 bid as well.
So for 57,000.
Oh, now I remember what this is. This one was here, so only sold for 57,000, and I don't know if it's a good deal. I don't know how much is going to be involved with it, but it's this property right here.
In downtown Stockton.
Yeah, and as you look around here, you can see how most of it is kind of been refurbished.
Yeah,
You've
it is
got
kind of one of the last buildings on the block that had not been updated.
yeah, so everything else is kind of updated. So the question would be, and in fact, this lot right here ended up selling for quite a bit. I think it sold for almost 200,000 just for this lot right here.
Interesting.
But, I don't know what would be involved with this, but in kind of looking at some of the properties in the area, there's a lot of these type that have been refurbished where the downstairs is some type of commercial type property, and then they put apartments up here within the top of the building. In fact, if we take a look at it, You can actually kind of see the back side of it as well. So it's, it's this building right here.
You know what? It looks like it had a fire, and the front face of it still looks pretty good. I mean, it could just be that the ceiling is just done whatever, but it really looks like a fire from up top. And if that's the case, then it would mean that a lot of the bones with the structure are still going to be okay. But it would be obviously a lot of money, but it would be really valuable too once you had it completed. I mean, compared to what it was purchased for, it would be highly valuable. Even I'll bet they can turn around and sell this if they wanted, just as is without doing anything. And somebody will come in here. We'll probably see it listed here before long. But yeah, you could see that this would be a highly valued property if somebody actually did a rehab on it.
I kind of I was wondering if that was a fire as well, and I tried to do a search on it to see if anything could pull up on it, and I couldn't see anything. That doesn't mean that there wasn't one. There very well could have been. You can see a little bit of smoke right there. I don't know if that's smoke or if that's, just stain. But here's the back side of the building, and really it is, it's got kind of a cool look to it that if somebody could restore that, and it's not like they paid a huge amount of money for it. They paid $47,000. This isn't the kind of deal that I would know how to do, but there's people out there, investors out there that do know how to do this, that are probably within the California area. And if they could have picked up this property and redid it, they could have, really probably made it into a great investment. And one thing that's kind of interesting is, I thought that this property first was at the tax sale, but that's kind of an interesting property as well. But we have these three structures right here that are kind of the eyesore of the whole town, and really are probably pretty good examples of ones that could be revitalized and still be profitable without tearing it down.
Yeah, it's an interesting property. And I mean, location wise, you can't get a better location than that. That's what those properties are all about, is the location. Fixing up a property like that would be highly valued, and it's going to be in the most desirable place because it is right in the middle of downtown for both, commercial opportunities there would be great, and residential opportunities there would be great.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is a good deal or not, but it was kind of interesting to see, one of these properties in downtown Stockton like that, that for the right type of investor, you can't buy that for less than $47,000 isn't very much money.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's just to be able to control it, a deal like that, it's really not very much at all. I mean, that could be a
Yeah,
multi-million-dollar property.
yeah, this is the little house that opened up at 30,000, ended up selling for 165,000. It's located in Oakland there. And here's the house, just a tiny little thing. Does need some work, but valued at about 391,000. So, there could be good profit within there, picked it up for about 35 cents on the dollar. Not too bad of a deal.
It's a simple enough house too that it's probably not going to take too much to fix up. So where they bought it at is really a pretty good percentage of value. They could probably turn around and sell it as is, and make money on it, or rehab it, whatever they want to do.
Yeah, here's another property that's located within Oakland. Started at 45,000 and so, ended up selling for 252. We don't have a lot of information. We could go look at the GIS and in the county record information, but just pulling it up quickly, we actually don't have quite a street view for it. It's kind of this property right here. But here's what the property, is currently available. Not currently available, but here's the house. So they ended up selling for, 252, and it sold for 520 back in October of 22nd. Right now they're valuing it about 471, and looking at the comps in here, most of them are kind of valued around 500,000. So I think that recent sale of it selling for 252 has kind of bumped this down lower than when it used to be. But what is kind of nice is that we can get an idea of what it looked like back in 2022.
It's an awesome purchase at 250. I mean, Yeah, from what we can see there, what it looks like it was built in what, in '88 or something like that. You know, it's a newer, yeah, in '88. Yeah, it's a newer townhouse. We can see that it was in pretty good shape just 2 years ago, or three, I guess 4 years ago now. But yeah, the value on it, they basically have the ability to double their money on it. Because I'm sure the value will bump back up there, above the $500,000 mark. Yeah, just knowing that it sold though for 520 back 4 years ago. Yeah, the value on it can only go up from here. They'll probably be able to double their money with this, and it's highly usable just like it is right now. It probably has pretty good rent income as well. If they wanted to just hang on to it, it wouldn't be a bad property to do that with.
No, and you can see why they were willing to pay. Easy property, easy to get into. We'll go over some of these kind of quick because we've taken up some time. Here's one that sold for $30,000, and we can see it's 10 acres. And it's actually this property right here. It includes this little pond here. They've obviously got some type of farming going on there. You've got some trailers and things. So it's kind of this 10 acres right around here. Here is pulling it up on Redfin. They're valuing it at 100,000. I guess they ended up paying 30 for it.
Yeah, that's a pretty good buy.
Yeah, here's a property right there within the area that sold for 95. Here's one that's right next to it that sold for 174. And then here's one that's within the area for 174 that's currently for sale. So
Oh, yeah, that's like as good as you get for land purchases of that amount. I mean, they didn't spend that much, and they really got a lot of property out of it.
yeah, I mean, so for 100,000 plus, I think that pond has some value. Looks like overall a pretty good deal. This is the type of land you pick up for 30 grand. Let's say you even sell it for 100 grand or 110 grand and sell it pretty quickly. You're still making 60, 70 grand on a deal like that.
Yeah, it was really an excellent purchase.
We'll look at this last one, and I don't know how good a deal it was. I was trying to find some comps. There was some comps within the area that I could find, but I just thought this was a really cool property. So
Yeah, so open for 12,000, sold for 72. It says it's how many acres here?
it is
15 acres.
15 acres, but we're going to kind of have to look at it with the GIS map. So here you can kind of see where it's at. In fact, I'll go ahead and click off this. You can kind of see that it comes along here and the road goes up on either side of it. So you've got property there to the right of the property and property to the left of the property. And then it looks like there's something back here within this area.
Is that a waterfall?
Yeah, this is what makes it so cool. So I think you could build on it, anywhere within this area right here, over on this side as well.
Is it just rapids maybe? Or maybe there's a waterfall there. It looks like there's
Oh no, it's awesome.
Oh yeah. Holy
This is
cow.
this is from the property.
Wow. Those are bigger hills than I realized. Wow, that's
Well, I think this is up a little higher because if we go back, I can go.
it would be awesome to own. I mean, look at that. That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome looking. Look at that. Somebody's got a fish trap there.
Yeah, but if we go back to where it's located at and you kind of get an idea of what it looks like from down below, it's not as steep right here. So I think as you come up into here, some of those photos were taken in here and maybe some were taken down kind of here in this area.
Yeah,
But
it looks like there's a lot of I mean, it has a lot of river in this lot.
so here's kind of the first part of it all along here.
Now that's probably a for sale sign for it right there.
Yeah, there's the for sale sign for it. back when this was taken in September of 2025. But you've got all this land right here, all this land over here, and you can see that it starts to kind of get hill. There's kind of the hill starts here and it kind of goes down here. So there is going to be some elevation changes, but in looking at some of the homes that were for sale up in this area, there's some that are on, on the edge of the cliffs. So this actually has quite a bit of, flatter type property right around here, and you might even be able to build right there pretty close to where the creek is located, because you'll have area you could build right here or area you could build right here.
What do you think? What do you think it's valued at? Any idea?
It was tough for me to really figure it out, because there's nothing quite like it that I could find that is sold recently. I found some on different areas, maybe like in a stream over here or up here further, that were selling between 200 to 300,000.
Wow.
But I'm not 100% sure on what the value is. This is just a little lot that was right next to it, that they say is valued at 81, but even back in 1989 for this 1 acre lot, they paid 165,000 for it. So you'd have to really have somebody that kind of wants, that type of property. But I thought it was kind of interesting, interesting property to sell at a tax sale, and for the right type of buyer, could have
Yeah, it'd be a cool place to build a house. It'd be
yeah.
a really cool place to build a house. That's an incredible lot, and yeah, and a lot that is probably valued way higher than what they paid. The 77,000 that they picked it up for, or 72,000 they picked it up for. They've got tons of equity in that if they wanted to develop that or just sell it as is. They've got their option. And what's nice about that property too is it's all the features of the property that make it unique that are going to lead people to want to buy it. Somebody would buy that based on its location.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there was quite a few more. I probably had another 10 different properties, but we'll go ahead and throw it back. We've already spent a lot of time, but there is good opportunity in California. In fact, some of the other ones that we're going to show were kind of cheaper type land that were picked up for a couple of grand that are worth 10 to 20 grand. And so, even though we looked at a little bit more expensive properties that people paid up for in circumstances, most of these properties were picked up for, under 40 cents on the dollar. And many of them are in areas where properties are selling, and picking it up at that price, you can still make a good profit on it.
Yeah, your guys' comments crack me up. Matt thought it was a pot farm. It probably is a pot farm.
It probably was. I just didn't want to say that. I'll go ahead and throw it back to you, Shade.
All right, cool. Yeah, it probably is horse country too. All right, let's do this. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. All right, perfect. All right, so with that being said, let's just talk briefly here. In this next section, we're going to review tax lien risks for just a minute, and then from there, we'll move on to the next topic here, which I think we're going to look at some upcoming opportunities as well. And so tax liens, though, are initially what attracted us, I guess, to the opportunity. Because tax liens I heard about long before I understood what a tax deed was. It was initially tax liens, and the whole idea with tax liens that was so appealing was this ability to have an investment that was very safe, where you could buy liens against properties. So they're using property as collateral, but they had the opportunity to pay out either high interest rate returns or lead to foreclosure. Now, it took a little while before we were able to figure out that part of it, but there are many things about tax liens that are great and that draw investors in, that make them appealing investments. So yeah, high rate of return between 10 to 20% if you look across the board. Investment security, they are secured by real estate. They are enforced by state laws, which very few investments can say, and they're very simple. I would say this last one is probably one of the big ones, in that most tax liens redeem. 95% plus end up redeeming. And what that means for the investor is they don't have to do anything but sit back and either collect a check or a direct deposit into their account. They don't have to do anything, because most of the time people end up paying off their delinquent taxes. It's just a matter of when that occurs. And so most of the time they don't have to do anything. It's a very small percentage of the time where you need to actually foreclose.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm biased, but I think that tax liens are pretty much the safest investment that you can make, because the property is acting as collateral. It's based on state law, and we have tax liens that go back to the 1930s. We just got old, tax liens and tax deeds that were purchased that were issued, 150 years ago. So it's been going on a long time. And what we want to do tonight is kind of go over that. Even though it's one of the safest investments, that means that you're not going to want to purchase properties on every single tax lien. Now, to kind of go over some of the quick basics, tax liens are going to be sold on a yearly basis in either county or, in some cases, city auctions. So a place like New Jersey, it's actually the local municipalities that are going to go ahead and do the tax sales. It's usually going to be the person that's collecting the taxes that's going to be in charge of having the tax sale, issuing the list, providing the information. And one of the great things about tax liens is that so many of these different areas are moving online. I mean, even here within the last couple of weeks on the podcast, we talked about Alabama tax liens. We talked about Mississippi tax liens. All of these different places are going online, but there is still some areas like South Carolina that are pretty much done all on site.
Yeah, and the interest rate, redemption period, bidding system, everything is dictated by state law, which is why it can be confusing when you go from state to state. But the tax lien states that are using tax liens, you can always refer back to the state law if you want to know any of the specifics or why they do certain things the way that they do. Now, if we're looking at a couple of the fundamentals here with tax liens, all tax liens are sold with a redemption period attached to them. That acts as the time period that the investor has to wait before they can take the lien and actively try to foreclose on the property. So it acts as a grace period for the lien holder. So also, every tax lien also pays out a set interest rate return, and that's it, because it has to have some kind of incentive there for the investor in order to buy the investment in the first place. And so the redemption period and the interest rate return are set at the time of purchase, when somebody buys the property at auction. But what kind of happens from there all depends on how long it takes for the property taxes to be paid off, or for the lien to redeem, which that's essentially what happens when the delinquent property owner pays off delinquent taxes and fees to the county. The county can remove the lien from the property and cut a check to the investor for the interest that they've earned up to that point, plus their initial investment. And so for the vast majority of the time for tax sale investors, they buy liens and then they wait for liens to redeem, which most do, and they earn good money on that as liens redeem. Occasionally, though, you may have to take a property through foreclosure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, usually you're going to get back your money, you're going to get back your interest rate return, and every state's going to be a little bit different. That's one thing about tax lien certificates is they're all going to have different interest rates. They're all going to have different redemption periods. They're all going to have different procedures for foreclosure, whether that means it's done through a county, like a self-executing foreclosure, or whether that's done by you by contacting an attorney. They're even going to have laws about how long a tax lien can still be on the books. In fact, we're going to talk about that in the tax lien risk. So just because tax liens are great, great investment, doesn't mean we're going to, they don't come without some level of risk. The risk in tax lien certificates is buying tax liens on properties that we don't want to end up with. And there's really four major risks that we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about bankruptcy, we're going to talk about roll-up, we're going to talk about junk land, and we're going to talk about condemned and in terrible condition homes and structured properties. These are the major risks that we're going to come across when looking at tax lien certificates, and these are the kind of tax liens that we're going to want to avoid regardless of what type of interest rate return we can earn on it.
Yeah, I mean, if we can see something in the records we're looking at about a property that that the owner is about to go into bankruptcy or something related to a bankruptcy, then we might just avoid the property. But in most cases, the county will actually pull the properties that are included in bankruptcy or anything like that. They'll pull it from their list so that they don't have to deal with the fallout of selling a lien against something they weren't supposed to sell a lien on. And so it's really difficult to try to predict when a bankruptcy will happen, because we're dealing with a small window of time here where somebody may file for bankruptcy and try to include their property taxes as part of it. However, one thing that we do know for certain is that property taxes are not something that get forgiven in bankruptcies. They still have to be paid. And so what that means for us as investors is, even in a worst case scenario, the worst thing that could happen is that they have your money basically kind of trapped there, and they are able to pay back what they owe in taxes in installments. Maybe they have to pay it back in pieces. And so if they do that, if they pay the county back in pieces, the county may end up paying you back in pieces as well. But you're not actually going to lose money on that. You'll still get all your money back. So it's hard to say it's a risk in the way that some of these other things we're going to be talking about are risks.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to remember about, bankruptcies and tax liens. First of all, like Shade said, we can't really research it before the auction. If there is a bankruptcy, you know, the county is going to go ahead and pull that. They're not going to go ahead and sell a tax lien to an investor on a property that has a bankruptcy. So it's going to happen after you've already purchased the property. So there's really no way to research it. It's not something that we're going to worry about, because chances are you're never going to encounter one of these. We've never heard of a situation where a bankruptcy hasn't been paid back, or a tax lien hasn't paid back that's gone through a bankruptcy. It could have happened, but we've never seen it. Worst case scenario, it's going to be a situation like I had here. This was a tax lien that I purchased back in, I can't remember, 2007 maybe. And, this tax could have been 2006. And this tax lien ended up going through a bankruptcy after I'd been into the tax lien about a year and a half. So about a year and a half in, this was a home. It went into a bankruptcy, and because of the bankruptcy, they weren't able to pay me back all immediately. In fact, many times if there is a bankruptcy, you'll go ahead and get redeemed and not even know that it's been redeemed. But in this case, you can see it was for $165, and so what they did, it was about a $1,200 lien. I had to get paid back in checks. I got a couple of checks every month. Sometimes I'd only get one check. Sometimes I'd get 3 checks. But over a period of about 6 months, they ended up paying me back my money and my interest.
Yeah. So essentially, you can't really lose your money with it, which is why we don't worry about it too much. Your money's always going to be well protected when you buy liens, as long as you're careful about making sure the lien is against a property that has real value. If that's the case, then your money's always going to be secure. Now, number 2 is tax lien roll-up. This is also a risk that doesn't necessarily exist the same quite everywhere. And what we mean by roll-up is this. The roll-up refers to any other tax liens that are issued against the property, or really any other outstanding taxes that are owed on the property. And the reason why that's important is because in order to foreclose on the property, so let's say your redemption period expires, and as a lien holder, you want to foreclose, one of the requirements in the county is going to be that you bring the taxes current, or that you pay off any other outstanding taxes that are owed in order to foreclose. And to do that, if there were any other liens that existed against the property, you would have to pay them. Now, if you had bought all the liens that had come up against the property, then you wouldn't have to pay anybody, because essentially you're the lien holder that has all the liens against the property. And so you've already paid that amount. But let's say you only had one of the liens and there were 2 other liens against the property, you would have to pay those liens off in order to foreclose on the property and bring the taxes current. That's one of those things that has to happen with a lien against the property in order for an ownership transfer to occur. So it's a requirement in order to foreclose. So one of the things that we need to know is how many other liens exist against a property when we go to buy a lien, because if it's a single lien against the property, that's one thing and easy to calculate. Most liens are going to represent a tiny percentage of the property value. I mean, less than 1%. But what if that one lien we're looking at is just one of a dozen liens or more that are against the same property? That's where it can change the numbers dramatically, where suddenly in order to foreclose, that number amount could be a very large amount. In some cases, maybe even higher than what the property is even valued at.
Yeah, now when we're talking about tax lien certificates, Shade kind of mentioned this, and we talked about this before. Not every state is, created equal. States are going to have different rules, and so within some states, what's called the life of the lien. This is how many tax liens can survive before they essentially fall off. They are no longer valid. So in a state like South Carolina, they only issued one tax lien, tax liens 1 year, and if they don't pay back within the year, then it goes and becomes a tax deed. So we're not going to be worried about a state like that. Or a state like Maryland, where you need to start the foreclosure process within 2.5 years, there's not as big a risk of having a massive roll-up. It's still something we would check in a state like Maryland, but we're not going to be worried as we would in the state of Florida, where 7 years tax liens can survive, or in Arizona, where 10 years worth of tax liens can survive. And so this can be a major risk in some areas, and this is the reason why it's so important that we research this information, we research these back tax liens, and to make sure that there's not going to be any huge debt, or essentially going to become what we call a toxic tax lien. In fact, we've seen this happen in states like Florida, where let's say that you looked at a tax lien certificate and it looks like, hey, the county has it's a nice lot, county has assessed value of around $10,000, and it's a $500 tax lien. This is just 5% of the property's value. I'm willing to go and invest into that. But really the risk is all of those other years worth of tax liens and the interest that they've been accruing over the last 7 years.
Yeah, we can see how the amount could add up very quickly, and what looks like a good lien or a good investment would actually be a mistake, because there could be more owed on the property than it's essentially worth. So that's why we check roll up, especially in certain areas. If you're buying liens in Florida or in Arizona, definitely going to check. And any of the states, I suppose here, I'm thinking about other states like Mississippi. Yeah, that's another state that could have liens that could exist and that there may be roll up with. There's probably other states as well that sell liens, that you need to check for roll up. The main point is to always know what the total amount owed in delinquent taxes is, not just the amount of the lien. As long as you know that, you'll be okay, and you won't make any mistakes, as long as you're just checking to see what that total bill is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and in some states, you'll have the option to pay that second or third year lien. In other states, they'll just go ahead and offer up that second year lien on the open market, and anyone can buy it. That's the reason why we have our state profile guides as part of our membership program, is so that you can go back and review the information in the state. In fact, we're updating those and reviewing those and adding new information when things change, so that you've got a resource that you can go to and find out more about the state, along with the code on where we're getting this information. When me and Shade first created our state guides, we used the state codes because there wasn't state guides back then. In fact, I think we were the first ones that created state guides, and we had to go and read all of the codes in the state law to even determine how they offered their tax sale properties.
Greg has a great question. He says, what if you hold the property for several years? Will the liens fall off? And the answer is yes. They would if you own the property. So if you were the property owner, and let's say you're paying the property taxes, on the property, eventually those liens will drop off of the record if you were just paying them. If you paid all the taxes after that, but see, the issue with that though is that one lien going to foreclosure would make the property then worth foreclosing on. But yeah, essentially though, every year liens are going to drop off. And so there were a lot of properties that we'd come across in Florida where they haven't had property taxes paid in decades. And so they're adding a new lien each year and they're dropping a new lien off, every year. But most of the time though, because we're trying to foreclose on it, in order to do it, they'd make us pay anyway, so it doesn't really affect us. But yeah, essentially though, in any of those states, it works that way where you can have a maximum number of liens against the property, and beyond that, that's all you can basically have. That's not the only risk though for tax liens, because like Steve was saying, we don't want to buy liens against against just any property. As long as we're careful about the properties the lien are placed against, and we're purchasing liens against properties that have use and value, we're going to be okay. But where you could make a mistake is if you buy a lien against a piece of useless land. Useless land is a risk for tax deed investors, because obviously you wouldn't want to buy a piece of property that you can't turn around and sell, or that doesn't have any real world use, because you can't do anything with it. And the county is still going to charge you property taxes for it. So it's not worth owning either. But buying a lien against a piece of useless land is equally a threat, or I guess a risk, because the property owner may not care to pay the property taxes off so that your lien redeems, and it may not be worth foreclosing on it if it's something like a useless lot. So if the lot doesn't have any real use or purpose, you're not going to want to foreclose on it. That's the real threat or the real risk.
Yeah, well, and a lot of these type of properties could have additional liens on them as well. So when we're talking about use as land, we're talking about, most landlocked property. If there was enough value or something to it, maybe you could look into it if it was a real big piece of land, but that's usually something we're going to avoid. A big one is side lots. There's so many of these side lots or weird shaped type of properties that come up on the market. In fact, they just are constantly coming up for the tax sale because nobody ever ends up actually foreclosing on the property. So it just goes, through this process over and over again. And we'll see in states where they actually sell off as deeds, and maybe somebody buys the deed and then doesn't pay the tax lien and it goes back to the tax sale. If there's serious topographical issues, or if it's located in a real wetland, if it's something that we don't want to own, then we're not going to bid on that tax lien certificate. And one thing to mention as well when we're talking about land. In a state like Florida, if I found a $10,000 building lot, or even a $5,000 or $6,000 building lot, maybe that's what the assessed value is, and I could buy a lien off for $100. In that kind of state, maybe I would go ahead and buy that lien, because if I was to foreclose on it, I could just pay the county the money, and as long as it's a usable property, it's probably going to sell at the tax sale, and I'm going to make back my money and my interest. But if I had to buy that same, let's say, lien in Arizona, well, I'm going to have to do the foreclosure on my own and have an attorney. Well, that may cost me $1,000 or $2,000 or maybe more than that. So in that kind of situation where our cost may be in Florida, $500 or $600, and if $6,000, $7,000 lot comes up for the auction, it's probably going to sell. Versus in Arizona, where we may have to pay $2,000 or $3,000 to do the foreclosure on a piece of land that's only worth $6,000.
Yeah, it can change the numbers on what would make sense in terms of your bottom dollar, or about the cheapest property you may want to target. If you have to deal with something like foreclosure costs, like hiring an attorney, even though if you're foreclosing on the property, you're not going to get reimbursed for anything, because you're basically, it's all your cost. You're the one foreclosing. And so, yeah, there's definitely going to be a minimum value that's going to make sense to pursue here with liens. Uh, yeah. I think if you invest in Arizona, you probably know about what that number is. Now, it's not the only risk, though. Condemned properties, or homes that need, if the property is basically falling down, if it needs a lot of work, if it's been condemned, a lot of properties like that are liens that you wouldn't want to own, because you wouldn't want to foreclose on the property. It's more of a headache than it's worth. The property may have also a giant tax bill, a lot of other liens that could be owned on top of that, which condemned properties oftentimes do. But if the property looks like a nightmare, if it looks like something bad has happened there, like the tree fell on the property, or the property burned down or something like that, that's also another sign, they probably don't want, any part of that. So we try to avoid any properties if it looks like, we generally are going to look at Google Maps if we can get street side images to try to see what the property is, look for signs that it's abandoned or if it's run down. The value a lot of times is also a real indication of what's going on. So if the value looks weird, that's the first thing that you're usually going to throw up some red flags for us and say, hey, there's something going on with this property, we need to look further into it. That's if it has a very low value. But if it has a higher value, that's usually a sign that, that it could be worth fixing up, or that there's something there that an investor could potentially work with. So one thing we've got to watch out for is value limited property. So if the property is only valued at at $20,000 to $60,000, if it's in usable condition, we've got to be careful with those as well, because there's just not enough profit in properties like that to fix them up, even if you could acquire them.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at two different properties, let's say that one is located in Miami and it's in rundown condition, but the market value of that home, fixed up is $800 to $1 million. Then that might be better to look at than, let's say, a tax lien on a property that's only valued at $40,000 or $60,000. you know, in that kind of scenario, because that property has a lot more value, maybe we're willing to bid on a house that's in a little bit rough condition. But if we're looking at tax liens that are in, you know, that are run down, we're going to really go through stage one due diligence. We kind of use stage one due diligence as our tax lien for tax lien certificates. And if you go through all of those processes where you're, you know, quickly looking at the market value, you're doing a good on-site evaluation, you know, and we look into any of these issues like the roll-up, then we're usually going to be making a pretty safe investment on our tax lien certificates.
Yeah, stage one research is generally sufficient for tax liens. We don't usually have to get in too deep with them because you have such a high chance of redeeming. Happens most of the time with tax liens, and so we can usually weed out any major problem properties with just stage one because problems tend to stand out. You know, and it'll be something like not having value or not being accessible or something like that. It usually will come out as soon as we look at it. But yeah, otherwise, tax liens are very safe investments. And if you're buying good tax liens against, which a good tax lien is just against a good usable property, something like a home or like a good piece of land, then it's about as safe as investment as you can find anywhere, and you know, a good way to make some money on your money.
Yeah, I mean, just remember, guys, you know, the property is essentially acting as collateral for the debt. So if the collateral is bad, if it's a bad property, then it's going to be a bad investment. And there's a ton of online auctions taking place. You know, we talked about Mississippi, we talked about Alabama, we've got Florida taking place next month, and quite a few other areas. So it's a great time if you are interested to get involved in tax lien to go ahead and get started. So now what we want to do, and we haven't done it for a while, is talk about Florida tax deeds, and go look at some upcoming auctions in Florida.
Yeah, Florida has always been, I think, one of the best states out there in terms of how they operate their tax sales, how they advertise them, how and what the opportunities are, the county records. They've just been leading the country, I think, in how they do things. At least ever since we've been involved with tax sales, they were the first ones to go online with a lot of stuff. Now they're unique in that Florida doesn't fall into just one category. They're a state that utilizes a tax lien system, and they also utilize a tax deed system. So they use both. You know, they have an annual auction in May in which they sell their tax liens every year. But then throughout the year, those liens are being foreclosed on by lien holders, taking them through a tax deed application process that is filling up tax deed auctions that happen throughout the year. So there are always Florida tax deed auctions that are happening. They also have their foreclosure auctions that happen in all of these counties as well. Most of the counties will separate the foreclosures though from their tax sale properties. So, you know, Florida liens are sold with a 2-year redemption period and a maximum rate of return of 18% annually. So you can basically bid down your interest rate though, you know, in trying to win the lien. But any lien that doesn't redeem after 2 years can be foreclosed on by filling out a tax deed application. And so when that happens, we get tax deed opportunities like we're going to show you here in Miami-Dade County right now.
Yeah, will you go back there real quick? I just want to make a couple of other points. You know, the tax lien auctions are going to be taking place, or who's going to conduct those auctions are going to be the tax collector, and the tax deed auctions are going to be held by the clerk of the court. So with the tax lien certificates, like Shay talked about, they're going to be bidding down the interest rate, and with the tax deeds, they're going to be used premium bid starting at the back tax lien. So all of those tax liens combined, that's going to be what the opening bid is. Now the last thing to remember is that many of these counties have moved online. So a majority of the tax lien auctions are held online, and a majority of the tax deed auctions are held online as well. So for online investors, Florida is one of the best states to invest into. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and look into some Florida auctions.
All right, what we're looking at here are the scheduled opportunities here in April in Florida. We have the bank foreclosures here in blue. We have the tax sale foreclosures here in orange. Let's just enlarge that a little bit here. So if we're looking at some of the properties here that are coming up for auction, we have a lot of opportunities here. There's still about, let me see, 21 properties here in this sale, and a number of opportunities we can review. Now, if we see properties where the opening bid is really high, we know those are probably going to be properties that have some kind of homestead exemption, although sometimes that doesn't necessarily change the numbers. We've seen properties where they can still be good deals, even with the higher opening bid amount, but that's something we can kind of acknowledge or see versus some of these other properties where the opening bid amount is quite a bit lower. Now, let's pull up this first property here.
Yeah, in fact, that was something we didn't mention about Florida, is that with the tax deed auctions, the one exception to starting at the opening bid amount is going to be a homestead property. And so if it does have this homestead exemption, then it's going to start at 50% of the assessed value in addition to the property taxes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the market value, what they're setting at the assessed value, is going to be the market value.
So homestead properties are always going to be owner occupied. That's one of the requirements, is they have to occupy the property that they get the exemptions on. But what homestead exemptions are, though, is essentially they're tax exemptions that they can qualify or apply for. And some of those things, meaning that, like, for instance, that they it's an owner occupied property here, and things they can do to help reduce the tax load. So one of the ways that we can see that is if we go into something like here, they actually have nice information here which shows their exemptions that helps us understand that. So they do have all the exemptions here, which we can see. There's one called Save Our Homes Cab here. Then there's a homestead, and then there's a second homestead exemption. And what it does is it reduces the taxable value of their property. So they have kind of all these things working together to help reduce the value of their property about $100,000 a year or so, roughly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty easy to see which properties are going to have the homestead exemption. Now, we just talked about tax lien certificates. That may be something to look into and at least think about if you're buying a tax lien on a homestead property. You might even be able to get a higher interest rate, but you will need to remember that that opening bid is going to start higher based on that. Now, you're not going to have to pay that. You're just going to pay the normal tax liens, but that is going to be one of the results of bidding on a tax lien on a homestead property.
Yeah. Now, in terms of values, we could look at, I don't know if this property is necessarily, the condos are probably relatively close, or at least closer. Sometimes they can be, but we'll pull it up here real quick. And there we go. And the unit that we're looking at here, I think, is unit number 1606 is going to be the number. And so let's pull up and look at the value here on it.
You can see where they've got some of the numbers. Sometimes you can go in there and kind of type in the number like Shade is doing, and it'll pull up the correct property.
I think it's that's right there, 1604. Holy cow, is that right? No, 1606. All right, hold on here. Let me go back here. That must be like a penthouse or something here.
It's 2-bedroom, 2-bath. We'll have to see how much they've got this one valued at. There's a 1-bedroom, 2-bath.
Yeah, so a smaller unit here, we can see that valued at 772. So still higher than what they're claiming it at the 603. But then I guess as far as the deal, though, even then they bought it for less than half of value, or about half of value is roughly about what they paid. So not a bad deal, and probably a lot better deal than you could get on the open market or trying to buy it any other way. That's not a bad deal.
Yeah, and we'll see it come up here to the auction, so it'll be interesting to see what it actually sells for. But starting out at that price, that still could make a lot of sense, even though that is a homestead property. And something like that, like a condo, we're going to eliminate a lot of risk. We're going to eliminate, like things like the roof condition or the foundation. Really, we're just looking at the interior of the property. In fact, we've even got photos that we can see of inside back the last time this property sold. So there's only so much damage that can be done. We're still going to need to rehab it, or we still may need to, but it's not the same type of risk as if it was just a regular structure or home.
And it looks like it was listed last in 2025. So about a year ago is about when it was listed last. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely opportunities with a property like that. And we can also look at properties right down below it. You know, we can see ones where they obviously don't have that same exemption because they're opening up for about 10% of what they say the assessed value is. And if we can click on it here, we can see what the property is based on the record. And interesting enough, this one is actually another condo, but it's just a condo that doesn't have that homestead exemption like we saw before. Now, what's interesting, if we look at it, we can see that the mailing address is another condo. It's just in a slightly different address, maybe a different building, I think is what it is. But you know, it's another condo. We can see, so the property address here on this one is 465. The mailing address, so it's property address is 465 Brickell, mailing address is 485 Brickell in a separate unit. And if we go down here and look under here, we can see the non-homestead cap that's there. We don't see any of those other things that are listed there, which is why it's opening up at a very, you know, a lower percentage of value here, or at about 10% of value at 38,000.
Yeah, and that opening bid is any of the tax liens that were issued on this. Maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 3 years. You know, we could go back and look, because after 2 years, whoever starts the foreclosure process first is going to be the one that essentially sends it to the deed sale. And they're going to need to pay off any of those other tax liens that are issued, their money and their interest, so that it ends up going to the deed sale. So you're kind of the only one that owes taxes on it, but you'll be earning an 18% return during that time between when you start the tax deed application and pay those other tax liens and until it goes to auction. So for a period of time there, you're going to be making the maximum return on any of the tax liens that you purchased.
Oh, interesting. And so we can actually see, you know, how much has been paid here at different points. And that amount due right there for 20, that's probably from last year's bill. This is probably, of course, we also have 2022 here. It was listed here as, well, that's the full bill amount, but it doesn't show as unpaid.
Yeah, well, you can see that 2022, I think, is it. That 2025, I wonder if that's kind of future owed or not, because doesn't it start about 32,000?
Yeah, yeah,
So
the,
it's just the 2022 auctions, oh, 38,000.
yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, just looking at this. So what it looks like is we can see where the property taxes were paid up until about 2021. That's the last year that they were paid. And then nothing's been paid since 2021. So like we were saying before, you know, you can have up to 7 years that will survive in Florida. And so what that means is with all of these that have not been paid yet, and we can actually see, so here's one of the liens right here, and we can see the interest rate that it's, you know, that it's out there and earning right now. Um, you know, there's a lien from you can see it was earning 0.25% here, and the face amount was $6,800. But then when that actually got paid though, nothing else since then has been paid. So there's $32,000 that listed right here. It's kind of set up as the annual bill, and there's $8,000 that's owed up here, but I don't see any other liens that have been issued per se. And so I don't know whether those are outstanding or active, but in any case, you have at least 4 years worth of taxes that haven't been paid on this property. And maybe that's the total amount that we see there that they have. Maybe that is all the roll up there is the 32,000 up to that point, plus maybe another 8,000.
I think it may have been the taxing certificate holder from 2022 that could have paid off the other debts.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, in order to, yep, that's right, to push the issue here. So that's what's sending the property to auction. So now it's going to get paid off, and either they're going to get their you know, they're going to get paid back their money plus their interest, or the property could be lost, which most likely it'll end up being paid off so they don't lose it. But if they did, yeah, they would certainly lose it here. It hasn't had its property taxes paid in a long time.
Yeah. Well, in a property like this, you know, there's advantages and there's obviously disadvantages to purchasing condos. But one of the big advantages is that you know, that we're just really worrying about the interior of the property. And if there was something majorly wrong, there would probably be information about that. So the only real risk is making sure that we're working with a good HOA or condo association. So we'll give them a call. We'll find out everything we can about the property. We'll tell them that we're interested, and we'll try to see if we can get in good with them before we actually buy the property in any type of condo situation.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's different from when we deal with a property like let's say this one here that starts at 21,000. It says it's valued at 187. What exactly is it? Well, if we look at it here, it is a single family house that we're looking at. Here's the property address. It's not owner occupied. We can see, that the owner or the mailing address is somewhere else there in Miami. If we're looking at it, it's a pretty simple little house, like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. If we were to look at what it looks like here, let me just pull it up here. And here is the image of it. So if we're looking at it overhead, there's the same property here. And from the front, it looks like this. Now I love properties like this because we look at it and it's a property that somebody's already gone through and done a rehab on. So we can see that because it has things like new windows, those are vinyl windows on it, which probably it's probably not a new property. So I'm sure these were added. The roof looks like it's new. Everything is there, including the stucco looks good. The soffit fascia, it's fenced off here. All those things are great. I mean, it's in Miami. That's another thing I guess a lot of people are going to be
What
looking for here.
One thing that's interesting about that, though, is if you're looking there at the grass looks like it's been uncut for at least a little bit. So, this is back in 2025, so it could still be occupied, but that's kind of, that's just kind of something I noticed, that even though everything looks good, it does look like the grass has been a little uncut. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Maybe they just went a few weeks. But as we're looking for any clues on the property that could tell us more about if it's currently being lived in. If we could see garbage cans or anything like that, that can
Yeah,
sometimes help.
yeah, we can get an idea here. The value on it's quite a bit higher than what they're estimating there at 180, more like 390 is about what they're putting it, which is it shows you that there's plenty of room bidding with these properties here to bid up, and we'll see what they go for. Ultimately bidding, but a property like that could be worth bidding up. It's been fixed up enough that I would treat it a little bit more like a newer property than I would probably quite like an old property.
Yeah, yeah, it's in pretty good shape.
So we have a couple more here we can take a look at. Let's pull up. And this one's another condo. It's kind of like the other one here that we're looking at. Now, another thing that's interesting about this one is it again has an owner that lives in a nearby condo, but not in the same place here. And we can see this one's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo we're looking at, and it doesn't have any of those homestead exemptions, which is why the opening bid amount is such a small percentage of the property's value. Again, this property's valued, they say, at 487, and is opening up for just 32,000.
Yeah, well, and we've seen some of these that have bid up to 80% of the market value, but we've seen some of these properties in auctions where even in a place like Miami, they're picked up for 40 to 50 cents on the dollar. And if you're picking up one of these condos that are newer built in a nice building, if we can get these for under 50 cents on the dollar, it's usually going to be a pretty good investment. I mean, this is right next to the Marriott, right there on the water. So these are properties that it can make sense to pay a little bit more for than maybe we would on a structured property, because we're only really worrying about the interior of the property.
All right, now it's going to be number A and then 2955. There's a lot of condos there. Look at that. That's crazy. All right. So we did find it though. They have it listed here at 600,000, which is closer to what we've seen with some of the others there. But it's still 100,000 plus over, what it's estimated at there. We don't have any interior images on it though. and it probably, in fact, let's look at something real quick here. You see it's owned here by a corporation, and it looks like it's been owned by them probably since about 2011, is when it was transferred into that. It's been like that ever since.
Yeah, we can see back in 2006, somebody paid $580 for it.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, yeah, so there are a lot of opportunities. This one it could bid up for a lot. I mean, chances are it will most likely redeem, and somebody's just going to pay off their taxes a little bit late here and avoid foreclosure. But actually looking at sales history on properties, it's one of the things that we like to go and check, because it can help us identify properties that have been through the tax sale multiple times. And if it has been through the property multiple times, sometimes it can make you wonder what's going on with the property, or why is it constantly going through the tax sale. It can help you identify issues or problems that the property might have.
Yeah, well, and one thing that's nice about Florida is that there's multiple counties that are holding auctions. Some counties hold multiple auctions even every single month. So there's all of these different counties that we can go ahead and bid in. We can go ahead and put a deposit down, which is usually about 5% of what we plan on bidding. And we might even be able, in most of these areas, we can actually even use that deposit in more than one county. So in this case, maybe you're investing in Lake County this month, but Lake County doesn't have an auction next month, so you're going to transfer that deposit over to Polk County and participate in the Polk County sale. And so this gives us the flexibility to invest in a lot of different counties within Florida, and pretty much use the same login and the same deposit from one auction to the next.
Yeah, in fact, let me just click on this one here. We've got a lot of interesting properties in this sale. Really, for there only being 20 properties in it, nearly all of these here are kind of interesting properties. Now, this is one that we've seen before, and I think it's going to go to auction this time, and may actually sell here for the end, or for the last time. And we can see this one's owned by the church, but the mailing address, property address are not the same. So there's a nearby church here that is probably the owner of the church, but this is the duplex. In fact, if I pull up the image here, you may recognize, because I think we've seen this property here before, but it has a very low opening bid amount compared to what it's starting for. I mean,
Yeah,
compared to its value.
in fact, last week when we talked about on-site evaluations, this is the property that I used to do an on-site evaluation slide. When we talked about looking at the exterior, looking at the windows, looking at the roof, we actually used this property as the example in last week's podcast.
Yeah, very interesting here. And let's see here. They value it at about 522. So certainly it's starting out for just $15,000, very low percentage of value that it's starting out. And it has pretty good value. And I'm sure if we were to look at, the rent potential on it is probably pretty good. I mean, they're estimated there. I wonder if the 2,300 is both sides there. If they're figuring you're going to get $1,100 or $1,200 a side, that would make sense.
It does have two addresses though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's true. They may just be showing it here.
I'm not sure if the other address pulls up a separate value or not, but it does have two addresses listed on the county record when we were looking.
Something else that's interesting about the property. I mean, so here's where we can see where it was moved into, the corporate name, or into the church's name. It looks like though that they've essentially kind of owned it here for a long time. This sale may not have ever must not have happened. No, this sale, no, they did buy it, right?
Well, no, I think that they were going to sell it to that CY Investments.
Oh,
You
that's
see where
right.
$100, but I don't think that you can see that it says corrective. I'm not sure that it ever actually got transferred to them, because it's still in the church's name now. In fact, if you look back at the photo, go back to the map, see that's the church right across the street.
Oh yeah, that makes sense right here. Yeah.
So, I think that's kind of where it, hopefully those aren't graves in the backyard. I can't tell. You got buy a property, and right behind your duplex, you've got 4 graves back there.
Yeah, you wouldn't be the first person that's bought a house with some bodies buried on it.
In fact, I was looking at over-the-counter list today for tax deeds, and this over-the-counter list was actually just had a full graveyard on there. You know, fortunately, there's nothing you can really do with that. It's probably the reason it was obviously privately owned, and they didn't pay the property taxes, and now it's just part of the over-the-counter list.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. I must have lost here one or two of the properties here.
Well, we've gone through quite a few, and it gives us a good idea of Florida, how Florida works. Easy to use. You can see how we can quickly pull up the records. We can look and see what the opening bid is. Does it have an address? If it doesn't have an address, or if it doesn't have a street number, it's most likely going to be land. And we can get a quick bid to value ratio of what is that opening bid versus the property's value.
Yeah, really, we can do it as fast in Florida as we can anywhere, really. And really, I think that out of any of the counties too I've ever seen, the Florida county records are the best. I haven't seen another county, or I haven't been in looking at the records of other states. I've never seen another place that I thought had better records than what we deal with Florida. Their records are always just they're put together pretty well. They're usually very comprehensive, include a lot of simple links to kind of help us go to other things or other tools. They're there. This house we can see is owner occupied. Everything about it is just easy to digest and to go through. I would say that doing due diligence work in Florida is always a pleasure, with the records that you have compared to what you run into in some places. Some counties just don't have the same degree of records that places like Florida will.
Yeah, well, and they even have the comparable sales there, where you can just click on a link and look at any of the sold properties. So they really do have a lot of information available. I think that all of them have links directly back to the deeds themselves. So it's quickly, you can easily look up those deeds quickly and see was it a warranty deed and start doing stage 2 due diligence. Now what we're going to kind of finish up before taking any questions if we have them is we're going to go look at a couple of properties that look like they have EPA risk. With these bad deal reviews, we like to look at properties that look like they could be risky properties that we would avoid, and kind of go through and show you different examples of the type of things that we need to be aware of when we're looking at tax sale properties and take into consideration if we're going to bid on them.
Yeah, now the properties we're going to look at, there are two properties to look at. It's this one here, and then the house next door here, which looks like this. All right, so we have one of them sold here for 131. The opening bid amount looks like it was 131, so it sold for opening bid with one bidder basically. The other one sold here for 226. It opened up for 63,000, and yeah, bid up quite a bit there. Had 35 bids. Now, one thing that's interesting about both of these properties, if we look at them, is as you're scrolling through the record, they have the information here about the property, including the address here. We can grab that address while we're talking about it. But then they have this thing, updates on messages, and they have this potential, contamination language was adjusted and documents were added. Something about contamination here, and they have some other things here, contaminated property, subject to a cleanup order by California Department of Toxic Substances. And they have a couple of different records that you can click on that provide some details about about exactly what it is that happened or what information they have on it.
Yeah, that was one thing that's helpful. The county has kind of went and let us know. Now, any type of industrial property, we talked about looking up on the EPA website, checking to see if we can find anything. But here they're letting us know automatically there's some type of issues with this property that we need to be aware of and need to consider if we try bidding on it.
Yeah, now if we look at the property and kind of see what it is, we can see that it is, it's in an industrial part here of Oakland. We can see the main building that we're looking at overhead. If I go down there on a street side image here, and
got the Breaking Bad.
oh, here he is, right. So this is actually the business right here that does kind of look like that. That's a rough motorhome. But it's this this ED coat, that is actually the business right there that we are talking about here. Now, what's interesting if we look at this is just underneath the documents that they have, these documents outline exactly what was required here or what was done, and I believe they're essentially getting sued for all the things that all the contaminants that they have. And what is, they're a metal coating company. This ED, well, I forget what they're called here, ED Coats. So it's a metal or metal coating business, and they have a whole bunch of stuff there on site. In fact, in this description, they go into a lot of details about exactly everything that's included here with with the same business, or that's associated with this ED coatings business. And then they start going through all of the different contamination that is included in this thing, and it has a lot of contamination. They get into what all of the different, I mean, and this is an industrial business that deals with large amounts of you know, chemicals like hydrochloric acid here, or they had a lot of crazy different chemicals that were there in just big barrels, you know, throughout the place for coatings that they're doing, or for different chemical processes that they have with metals. And so this description goes into a lot of depth here, you know, about the properties and everything that's been included here, which I thought was, you know, was pretty interesting.
Yeah, well, it's definitely, you're not just buying the property without taking on a serious risk. Now, they got it for pretty cheap. In fact, if you look at the property, you know, there's, it kind of goes around that street, and there's a house next to it as well. And it seems like all of these addresses on this property are kind of connected to it.
Yeah, like over, you talking over here or
Well,
over
see
on
where
this
it
side?
says, see where it says 724?
Oh yeah, that one right there.
Yeah, click on that one. That's the house, and then you can look down and look at the front side of the property. So this house is another one of the properties that sold, but this house and this commercial property here to the right is a number of different addresses are posted here, but all of these addresses are included within this lawsuit. So this whole area, you're talking about a pretty big area, you can see from that house all the way to the end of the street, are part of these tax sales being sold in two different auctions, but they're all kind of part of the same problem. So what is that valued at? They were picked up for pretty cheap, but we're also looking at some serious risk that we would need to look into what this lawsuit entails, how much it's going to cost to remedy, you know, fix it, if we were to try to bid on this type of property.
Yeah, I mean, everything that's currently on site, you know, would be one of the major problems. So, you know, the first thing is, you know, I mean, are they going to remove everything that's there, or is everything that was on the site at the time of the inspection still there? And if it is still there, that's going to be a real cleanup nightmare. I don't know how they would deal with that. You know, if we go to the EPA website, which I don't know if the EPA website is necessarily going to give us more information than what we're getting, you know, right there from within those court documents we were just looking at. Those are pretty detailed in their you know, their description of everything that's happening. But what we can do, though, what's interesting about this is we can go here to you know, we can basically pull up their site here. They have contamination areas here in my neighborhood, which you could go into specific areas here if you want, but we're going to go right here because we can see. In fact, one thing that's helpful is if you kind of know about where the property is located at here, you know, on the maps, we can kind of see about which part here of Oakland and where it's at. We can pull up this tool here and we can see. So they actually have a couple of different properties that are listed here, but if I click on that one, here we go. So that's actually ED Coat Inc. That is the business there that, you know, we're talking about, that has all these different properties here, and they have the location there figured out. And we pull up this.
Yeah, and where this really becomes helpful as well is if we're looking into areas where we don't automatically see that lawsuit. So if ever, anytime that we see industrial, commercial type property like that, we're going to do a quick check. You can check by address. You can check just like Shay did, just by going into the area. You can even put coordinates in there and pull up any records on that property and see if the EPA has issued anything.
Yeah, which, you know, it's interesting. So here, from the EPA site, you know, by clicking on that, first off, if we go over here and look, they have their legend here that tells us, what each one of the little things they have here mean. And if we're looking at, at this property right here, it is right here. It's listed as a Superfund non-MPL site. I'd have to look and see here what the MPL sites are versus non-MPL. I'm not even sure exactly what that means. I'm not exactly sure the Superfund, how exactly that part of it even works, because we generally have avoided most of the properties like this. We can get additional details here on it though by going in, and when you click on the area, you can get an FRS facility detail report. Here is what pulls up, and this essentially will show us any of the actions or environmental interests it has here. These are basically actions that were taken that involve this ED Coat company. We can see listed here, and we can see the relation, basically what some of these things were that have been done. Most of these things are actually pretty old, or at least, most of the stuff that I was looking at was not in recent years. I mean, you can see some of the last updates here on these things are from 2002. That one's 2018, which I guess is a little bit newer here than a lot of the other things, 2007, 2012, but there's plenty of stuff here to look at. And
Well, and
again,
there's OSHA violations against it. I mean, it seems like there's been a long history, and that's probably the reason why they've gone all the way to having some type of state lawsuit put on the property as well. And so, if there's nothing there within the property, then they're not going to have records. But we can see that there's quite a lot of records here on this particular property.
yeah, it really is. It's interesting. So all of the properties associated with this company, could be problematic, but it's because they have basically gone in there before and they've done a full accounting. They basically listed everything, all of the chemicals that are there on site, and they have all of that stuff here. And so if it was removed, that would be a problem. Basically, what they have the problem with here is not only the stuff that is listed here and it's starting to leak, but the stuff that they're trying to store as well. They've already tried to shut the place off from getting into the groundwater contaminants. And that's what a lot of this stuff is about trying to limit the damage that can be done as a result of all the different chemicals that they're using. And so I'm sure they would love to get another business owner in here that was doing anything else except for like metal coatings here. And the other problem though is what's left over and some of the contamination that would be left over. Even if all of the stuff was taken out, if all of the chemicals were removed, there is still an ongoing contamination issue that you would have to deal with here because, there's been leaks in the past, and it may just be a matter of testing, but it's not out of the, it's not out of the woods yet. It's not basically free of the EPA, even if you removed all of the materials.
Yeah, well, I mean, is that $200,000? Is that $500,000? Is that $1 million? That's something we don't know, and so that's part of the reason we'll avoid these type of properties. And you can see how close it is to the waterway as well. That's probably also a concern because it's really not too far away from from the river and the ocean, and so because of that, that's going to be a big concern. And so in that kind of situation, maybe there's money to be made in it, but you'd really need to know what you're doing and understand, even if you're picking that property up like they did for pretty cheap.
Yeah, which they're interesting properties. It's always interesting to see properties that have different issues or problems, and environmental ones are definitely one that we don't have experience buying. We haven't bought anything that had environmental issues, and it doesn't sound like it would be much fun. You're much better off avoiding environmental issues. Would probably be the least favorite of any issues you could have.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of the auctions that are taking place, opportunities that are available, what to watch for. And we definitely appreciate you guys. We'll be doing this again next week.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for joining us. We'll get the replay out, but aside from that, we'll plan on seeing you all next week.
Yep, thanks again.
Thank you.